In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to digitally color and digitally ink and color using Procreate. And I originally was not going to do this tutorial. I was just going to do a Photoshop one, but I decided, I've got a little extra time here, and I love using Procreate, so I might as well do this. So anyway, the way we need to get started is there is a drawing, and that is this drawing here. And I'll just click on it here. And this drawing is actually uploaded to your D2L class. And you'll need to download this. And you can download it to your iCloud. Or you can also drag it into your photos, because there's a couple of ways to bring this in. So one way to make a document, we could import it. And then we would go to our iCloud drive. And then we would look for this drawing here. We need to be on the desktop. There we go. Okay, because it's on my desktop. It's not my iCloud drive. But like I said, you can put it in your iCloud drive, and then here it is. And what it will do is it will open up like this. Okay, so you can actually start working on it, and therefore you would lower the opacity, and begin working. The other way we could do this is, of course, I've got a document set up already. You want to create a new document that's 6.5 inches wide by 10 inches high, okay? And then you could go to insert a photo or insert a file. And if we insert a file, we could do the same thing. If you insert a photo, I've got this image in my photos. I drag it over to my photos so I can bring it in this way. All right, so what we're doing is, and I think most of you work in Procreate kind of already know this, but I'm just going to go through it anyway. So what we're going to do is we're going to lower our opacity for this layer, and then we're going to make a new layer, and then we're going to go and get a pen. And these are all new pens and brushes and pencils created by Kyle T. Webster. And he's given them some unusual names. I kind of laugh and giggle because I was discussing this with a student. Why doesn't he name them, HB or B6 or so, something that we can all kind of relate to, ebony pencil or whatever. Anyway, I'm going to be using this pen right here, which is Elphinstein, I guess is how you pronounce that, or Elphinstone. I apologize. All right, so anyway, when you ink, you want to be deliberate, and you also want to kind of decide on what you're inking, and like I'm just kind of undoing here occasionally, and I'm just going through here. I've done this before. And, one of the key things is, and I love this brush, by the way. See how that you get this thick and thin? It's beautiful. Is, the line quality. We need to make this look deliberate, and we don't want to be sketchy. We don't want to do that. We could sketch like that if it's clean in the end. Something just fell off my desk there. That was my iPhone. Okay, so anyway, we want it to look very clean, very deliberate. Sketching is for when we do a drawing or a sketch, a pencil, and inking is when we do something more refined. And there's always choices as far as what type of line we use, how thick it is, what is the quality of that line, and that is so key when you're inking. Is you're having to make some conscious decisions. If it's your own drawing, sometimes it's a lot easier because kind of what you want to be inked. And, in this drawing, I didn't even discuss this in my Photoshop tutorial. That is, I have all these sketchy lines here, but these sketchy lines are meant for shading. They're not meant for inking. Okay? And so I'm just going to just play around here. And I don't like that line, so I'll undo that. Yes. All right, so one thing that's important when you're inking is to turn off and on your drawing to see what your line quality is like, and zooming out to see, because sometimes you can get too heavy in one area. And primarily when you ink something, we're going to go down here to this shoe here. I'm not going to ink the whole thing, so just bear with me as I go through some of this. is the line quality, the weight of the line. So typically, when you're doing an ink drawing, you want to have a thicker containment line going around certain things. Like and usually, like in this case, we're doing it around this mouse. And what that means is that we want a thicker line all around the exterior of this, and our thinner lines are going to go inside. And what that helps to do is it helps to bring the mouse out of the background, so that we're looking at the contour of the outside of the mouse, and then we see the details on the inside. Because I see some people, they ink things and they get really thick on the inside and thin on the outside, and that really just doesn't work. Also, line weight we can think about in terms of, like this is the bottom part of the shoe. If we want to show it having weight to feel like gravity, then we might do this line just a little thicker. We can go over it again, so it feels like he's standing there. So I got a nice, and one thing I just did, and we'll discuss this more in just a moment, is what I love about Procreate is you can make a line, and when you want to make a curve, you just hold down and you can edit that. Okay, I want to make that really thinner, so I'm going to do it thin, like that. All right, and then I'm going to hold down here, and I'm just going to erase out this part that sticks out. I'm just going to drag it around here. But we'll talk more about that in a moment. But as you can see, I've got some thicker lines on the outside, thinner lines on the inside of this drawing. And before I get too far here, we'll talk about making different layers for inking, because we don't have to ink everything on the same layer. If it helps, we can ink things on separate layers. And one thing I want to do is, I'm going to stop right now with this shoelace. But as you can see, I'm making this shoelace. I just can't stop myself because I'm kind of drawing. Sometimes I want to move on, and I'm talking, and it's like, okay, well, let's just keep drawing this. But anyway, you see, I've got these thinner lines. And see what that does there? It just helps to bring the mouse's body forward, out of this white background, even if we've got other objects drawn back there, okay? But anyway, what I was going to say is, typically, like if I want to do something like this tail, I might draw this tail on a different layer. So therefore, I can go back and do this and erase out. Now, in my Photoshop tutorial, I was just sort of doing it on the same layer and going back and cleanly inking, but cleanly erasing. But, sometimes it's good just to do this and make another layer there. I'm just going to... And what I love about Procreate is how clean it can make that by just holding down the pen longer. And let's take a look at this again. See, that might be a little too thick. And if I erase... When I use my eraser, I usually typically like to use the same pen that I'm erasing with. So I'm going to kind of go back through here and see if I can erase out a little bit of this, like that. And that looks a little bit better. I'm going to go do the same thing here. And we're going to edit this. See, that's just something I'm going to talk about here in just a moment more. And that is, we can edit this arc. Oh, and I wish Photoshop could do this, because a lot of times I'll be drawing in Photoshop and I'll hold down my Cintiq pen and nothing happens. So anyway, let me continue on here. And I actually have this situated. And as you can see here, we've got these two. We can merge these layers. We do that by going to layer and merging down like that. And then it's a good idea to name your layers. We could call this mouse inking. And, didn't spell inking right. All right. But anyway, I actually have this more blocked out in stages here. So I have this one here where I've got my drawing and everything set up, and I've got him inked out. And let's take a look at him. Let's turn this off. And now we're going to work on the clock. And when we work, see, I like to do different layers because, this is what I'm talking about here. If we got a line here, and a line here, and it's supposed to be a straight line, if we do this in sections, it may not look like it links up. And that's why it's so key if you do it on a separate layer, we can actually draw straight through. Now, I don't like that because it's too thick. We don't want this line here to be thicker than the mouse. It can be the same width or a little thinner, and that's not bad, but I might... There we go. I was just in the middle of a thought there. What I did was I just didn't bear down as hard when I drew this, so it's a little thinner, and it's, comparably, it's close to the same weight as some of the mouse, maybe a little thicker in areas, especially the thinner areas. But we want this to not be so, because if we make this line too thick, it's going to pop forward and our mouse, and it's going to make everything look weird, okay? So that's one of the things you want to do when you're inking things. And see, let's take a look at this. Let's turn this off here. All right, see, that doesn't look bad. You can see the thicker lines around the mouse. Same thing there, okay. That's what you need to think about when you're inking, is the thickness of the line, the quality of the line. And mind you, what I'm doing here too, in case you don't know this, is I'm holding down on my pen, and it draws a nice straight line there. Okay, I love that. It's just, and we can edit that line too if we need to move it or anything. If we want to, let's say we move it out this way because that was getting a little thin there, therefore we can come back in and erase out and clean this up like this. I typically will ink something with the same pen all the way through, unless there's something I need to do and I need to grab a different pen. Anyway, we want to kind of work on this part first, this exterior. And I'm holding down, and I'm going to go and edit the arc, because like I said, all you do is hold down after you've drawn an arc. And the problem is in Procreate, sometimes you draw this arc and it just doesn't want to do what you want it to do. So sometimes you have to make a greater arc, We'll talk about that in just a moment here. I'm just trying to get this a little bit better here, because I want that and to be thicker, and then the interior to be thinner again. Oops. Okay, that's cool. I like that. And then we're going to go through and do these. And maybe not that thin. Okay, it's not... I got to make sure we're linked up here. And this always takes a few... Well, and mind you, I could just edit this line. You see how that? There we go. Okay. That's better. Oops. Well, let's edit the line so we can line it up there. There we go. See, that's what I like about Procreate. And sometimes I forget sometimes. It's like, oh, yeah, Procreate can do this. All right. Let me go edit it so it links up to that. All right, good. All right, so let me go and do the clock. We can do... Oh, for some reason, sometimes I get stuck. Sometimes it just seems like my eraser, obviously... Next thing I'm drawing with my brush. Next thing I know, I've got the eraser on. And I don't know why. All right. I'm trying to get this clock here with an arc. And this is what I love about Procreate, is this, how clean we can get this, and we can rotate this around and try to get something. I might make this clock face just a little thicker, since it's an important part of the clock, and therefore this part right here we could do thinner. I like that thick and thin. Okay, so now we're going to do the Roman numerals. And in my Photoshop tutorial, I said there's the text tool in Procreate, or I think I refer to it as a text tool, but really it's not a text tool. What it is if you have to go over to this little wrench here, and we're going to do add, and we're going to add text, and we're going to type in XII, or actually we're going to do capital I's. I'm trying to let me just do caps lock on there. There we go. Okay. Then we're going to have to edit this. And we go to this little icon right here. Okay. And then we're going to go and look for something that has a serif to it. And we got to select over it there like that. Okay. Then we got to go to font. Oh, I gotta go back here. That's one thing that happens over and over again. If you don't have it selected, it takes you back and forth. And I'm just gonna pick a font here that's a serif font. I don't have a lot of fonts loaded up in here. I'm just looking for something that looks nice. And what I mean by serif, it's got those little feet there. Maybe Palatino. Okay. Design-wise, they have changed this a little bit here. Let's see here what we got. We got size, kerning, tracking, opacity. Yeah, they've changed this since I've worked on this last, and it's not bad. It's just they simplified it here. I've got tracking, lighting. I don't have anything to do with what I wanted to do, but anyway, what we could do is we could pick a font here, and I'm just playing around here, Palatino. Let me see if there's anything else I'd like to use. Maybe this STD, whatever that is, I'm just playing around here. Times. We'll do times, okay? And let's just use that and just click OK. Okay, I like that. It's hard to tell when it's highlighted, but we're going to actually play around with this. And we can actually duplicate this, and we'll duplicate it a couple times, because one of the things we want to do with this is we want to take one over here, we want to take the other one over here. Okay, we want to go and edit. Let's see, edit text, and with this one we're going to delete that one. Okay, bring that down here. We'll duplicate this again. It just saves time if I do it like this. And, whoops, we just want to delete one of those. Whoops, don't want to, yeah, there we go. Okay, good. So now I've got a 1 there. I got a 2 there. I've got a 12. Well, we want this to be 11, so let's go and edit the text here. And delete that, okay. And let's go back to my 12 here. And now we've got them all, and we can start to distort them a little bit. I should have probably started them all the same, but I'm just winging this as I go along here. Because what I like to do is try to get the size correct first before. And I'm trying to distort these a little bit here. And see what happens is when I'm distorting them, it rasterizes them. It automatically does that. It wasn't doing this in earlier versions, but as soon as I distort this, look at the icons have changed. That's because these icons, this is no longer text. We can't edit it as text once we distort it, okay? And so now we can go in here. And I actually hand drew these. But I'm going to distort these to go around the clock face. And let me see here. And then what we can do is once we do that, and here's the deal. You want to do all your distorting ahead of time. like this, because if we go back and realize, oh, I've got to make this more elongated or whatever, and we go back here and try to do this, then you get this. This is the same thing that Photoshop does. You see the bounding box changes, and it doesn't go around the text like it did before. And so that's why I'm actually doing this in this manner, so that I try to get the size correct first on all of them, and then I go in and distort them all and try to make some improvements if possible. And like I said, I hand drew these when I made this drawing. There we go. It's almost, and we can zoom out here, take a look here, and not bad. Okay, so the thing is that we don't. The difference between Photoshop, now we can collapse all these at once, so they're all on the one layer here. We can even take it down to, if we're going to keep the name of the clock inking, because if I do this, oops, we could do that. What I was going to say is, if I move this down below the clock and then I merge this, well, it does that. Okay, maybe I should have done this. See, this is what happens sometimes when I'm doing a demo. Things don't work the way I think they're going to work. All right, so if I merged that down, what it did was, and I'm going to keep it merged, but it kept the same name. So the layer on the bottom is the name of everything. And I was just playing around with that for a second, just to see. I actually want these on a separate layer because I think I'm going to add color to them, and I just wanted to see that about merging there for a second. Anyway, I'm going to now make this clock hand, and I think the best way to go about doing this is we're going to go to Canvas up here. I'm going to go to Drawing Guides, and we're going to edit those drawing guides, and I'm going to go to Symmetry. Okay, and we're going to drag down the Symmetry down to here. Now, the clock hand is at an angle, but I'm going to just draw it straight on here. Alright, and this layer has Drawing Assist. You can turn it off and on. So I'm going to keep it on here. And why I'm going to keep it on is because I want to do this. I want to I'm just going to erase this part right here. So, yeah, that's not bad. And this may be the fastest way to draw this. We don't have the pen tool, but we do have this, and I think this is very helpful, the symmetry here. And therefore we can just clean it up, make it as clean as possible. Maybe point that a little bit more. Okay, and then we can draw don't like that. Then we can draw the clock hand like that. Actually, we could turn Drawing Assist off and then draw the clock hand. There we go. Because you can keep that Drawing Assist off and on. What I'm going to do is, before I use the Drawing Assist, I'm going to distort this like this. Okay, and then I'm going to go and draw that line now and do something like that. And therefore I'm going to duplicate this. So now I've got two of them. And this next one's going to go over here. This one goes here. Alright, and then we're going to just rotate this into place. And the thing I like about the new Procreate is it's pretty clean. Although it's not as clean as I was hoping it would be. As when I rotated it, it did get a little blurrier. And so we might need to go back in and... yeah, it did get blurrier. But I was noticing before it wasn't, some of that wasn't as blurry. I'm just sharpening this up just a little bit, because that is one of the problems with Procreate is when you rotate it, and I noticed it had gotten better, but sometimes I was trying to change the settings on that. Anyway, I'm just cleaning this up just a little bit so it's a little sharper. Yeah, my brush is so big. Okay, that's good. Let's go to this one. Maybe it's the bicubic that does a better job of rotating it. I changed it on the other one. Because you got nearest neighbor, which is blurrier. Bilinear, which is okay. And bilinear is not bad. We could try bilinear just to see what it looks like. Okay, so anyway, once we have that done, then we can start to color, okay? And one of my hands is falling asleep. The hand holding my iPad. It happens because I was leaning my elbow on my chair, and it started to fall asleep there. So anyway, what I want to do next is, once we get all this done, we can collapse these down, merge down, and we'll rename this one. We'll call it, we'll name it over here. Rename, or we could call it hands too. All right, and then this will be, we'll just keep it like that. Because I was thinking of actually coloring those things. So now that we have this, what we want to do is we want to start coloring. And the way we do this is, and if you don't know this already, we should make the colors underneath. And so I actually have a palette I created. And you can create your own palette, because I am going to upload, and we'll go to palettes here. I'm going to upload a JPEG of our finished, what this thing should look like finished, okay? And what we can do is we can go and create new palette from file or photos, okay? I'm going to use photos because I have in my photos, I got some, we're going to do Albert Einstein maybe. I'm thinking of doing that for one of our tutorials when we do a portrait here. Anyway, this image here, and see, I just made a palette from all that. That image there is going to be uploaded to your D2L, so you could bring that in and make a palette out of that. And therefore, we're going to start, coloring this thing, and I'm going to make a color for the clock. Let's go down here, and I guess the fastest way to do this would be to do freehand and do color fill, but let's pick a color before we do that. Maybe this color. And if it's too dark, we can always change it. But what I'm going to do is I'm using kind of like my magic wand, and I'm just going to do a shape. I'm holding my breath here as I'm doing this. There we go. Okay. And see, we make our color underneath, so therefore our line will be on top. And by this, we can do all kinds of things. Well, one thing is I'm going to lock the pixels. We'll do alpha lock, and that locks the pixels. That's just like what you would do in Photoshop, okay? And then let's get a lighter color here. I'm going to use a lighter color for the top. Maybe this top part's going to be a little lighter in color. And go all the way around, and boom. Sorry about that. You get your color like this, okay? And I'm just having fun here because I love coloring things. I'm actually going to make we could call this, rename this clock color. It's good to name your layers. I don't always name mine, but it's helpful. Especially when you're sharing your files and you're going to be uploading your file to me so I can see what you've done with this exercise. We'll call this clock, face. Okay, and I'm going to just do, I'm going to use a kind of a white, off-white color here that's from this. This time I'm just going to draw an ellipse. And I'm going to try to keep it within that area here. And then I'm going to close it off, and then I'm going to drag this down so it does that. So now I've got that color there. I'm going to make another layer, and this will be outer. I'm going to name this one outer ring. Okay. And we're going to pick a kind of a gold color for that outer ring there. And make sure that this is underneath it. Okay, so. And typically what I try to do is I always sort of overlap. So let's just go through like this. And then do a nice curve this way. And then we'll just fill that in there like that. Okay, now I want to make a color for my, I'm going to move my drawing up here. And I'm going to set this drawing to multiply so we can still see some of the shading there, okay, on top of all this stuff. This will be the wall. Rename wall. Okay. And I'm going to make a nice kind of purpley color here. That's a good purpley color. We'll fill layer. And that's how, see, I just filled the layer with all that one color there, okay. And then we're going to do, I'm going to do the wall stripes, and we're going to make a new layer here. Rename it stripes. Because you may be looking at this drawing thinking, well, is he in jail? Are these bars? And the other thing, too, I want to point out is they have lines, but really those lines just represent color. So that's why I did not ink these, okay? And you don't want to ink these lines because it's going to look too static, okay? And that's the thing, when you're working on a drawing, you don't always have to ink everything, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to do this, and that is I'm going to make it a rectangle, and I'm going to make it go all the way down here like this. Oh, we don't have that layer on. Oh, we do. Oh, anyway, wrong color. I wanted to use this gold color. So I'm just going to drag that color over here. There we go. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just duplicate this stripe and drag this on over like this. And I'm going to try to space these out. So just bear with me here. Because we could do them all, like just draw them. And when I drew these, I try to do a nice job drawing them, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to make all my stripes like this. Maybe tuck that in a little bit closer. I'm looking at the distances between each of these, like this. Okay, and then we'll duplicate this one. And in the end, what we're going to do is just distort this. Okay. I'm thinking I'm going to go back here. Sorry about this. Just takes a moment here. This is, the power of working digitally, and that is we can make a drawing like we're doing with different layers here. I'm going to duplicate this one here. Now you could, if you don't want to do this while the way I'm doing this, you can do it differently. And what I'm trying to do is just space these out so they're even spacing or close to it. And let's see here. That's not bad, because I'm looking at the distances between each of these. I think we could take all these now, and then I'm going to distort them. And this is what I did in Photoshop. Was I just sort of, distorted these. So they are all similar and not different. Like that. Okay. So now what I want to do is, and we can turn off this drawing for a second here. So now I've got these nice clean stripes. I want to I want these stripes to get darker and to have the same color blue, or purple, that is, or violet I should say, as the background. And I did this in Photoshop. I'm going to do a mask, and with a mask we can erase out without destroying the shapes. And I'm going to go and look under basic and find a nice, I like this mint one because it's a little pebbly here. But what I'm doing is I'm just gonna erase out a little bit of this. Okay, like that. Now I might go back down here to the wall and pick a little darker purple color here, like this, and paint with it. And I'm going to use the same color that I'm painting, or the same brush there. Okay, maybe like that. So now the wall's going to get darker down there. Let's see here. We're going to lighten the wall a little bit up here. So the wall will get lighter up here. Like that. And if we want to lighten the stripes, we'll just alpha lock them and use a white or off-white here and kind of do that, okay? So anyway, that's how I'm doing this. I actually have this more finished. Oh, before we get on here, we could actually change the colors, because what I wanted to do was I wanted to make these Roman numerals kind of a gold color like this with fill layer. There we go. The clock hands, we can keep them dark. What I'm thinking about doing is duplicating these hands here, taking and moving them just a little bit like that. Turn the alpha lock on, and let's pick the same kind of color for as the wall and fill layer, and therefore we have a cast shadow of that. Now, if the clock hands, I mean the Roman numerals, if they're not dark enough, I'm gonna pick another darker color here. We'll fill layer again. We do have, or if we want to make it darker with that gold color, I just want to make sure I'm on the right layer. We'll go over here to hue and saturation and just lower that a little bit so that it looks like that. Okay. Anyway, I'm not going to do the whole thing here because I want to move on to this. This is our mouse with the colors and everything. Okay. And so most of the colors are done. I've even got a cast shadow here. And one of the things I did with my cast shadow was, is that it's like a gradient. I actually went lighter because if you ever do cast shadows, they are darkest near the object that's casting the shadow, and as they go off, they fade. Now, one of the things I did in the tutorial for Photoshop was I actually took the time and blurred some of these edges. I'm going to turn off my drawing there for a second. We can use our smudge tool, and I'm going to use this little Raven brush, which is like an airbrush, more or less. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to soften some of these edges on this cast shadow towards the outer parts, okay? Because what happens typically when you've got a cast shadow up is that it's sharpest and darkest near the subject, and as it goes away, it becomes blurrier and lighter, like that, okay? And so it gives us a sense of realism there. Now, I didn't have my stripes in this one. I didn't include them in this version, but I thought, okay, I was going to show you on this version the stripes, but you've already seen that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you about painting the mouse. And the mouse, we have this kind of shading on to suggest anatomy, because we can kind of see out of that his knees. Okay. And we just got to find the right brush for it. And what I've got here is, in my brushes, I've uploaded the Kyle's concept art brushes, okay? And you can always upload brushes, import from files. I've got brushes on my desktop here. And I'm hoping this works correctly here. Let's see, here's brushes. And here's Kyle brushes. I've got the concept art brushes, but I think I'll just bring in another set of brushes to show you how to do this. But we can bring in, I like rakes. I sometimes I'll use rake brushes. And it's got to download for a second. It's got to sync up here, so bear with me. It shouldn't take too long. And it's bringing them in. So anyway, if you go into Photoshop and you go into your brushes, and I cover this in the Photoshop tutorial, there's a thing that says in the brush options, it says get more brushes, and it takes you outside to a internet site with Adobe, and if you scroll down, you'll see all the Kyle brushes. Well, you can actually import those brushes in here. You can import any Photoshop brush into Procreate, which is awesome, okay? But so I brought in these rake brushes, which are cool. I won't need them for this. They do have a kind of a nice look here. But in the concept art brushes, I like to use this fur brush. And I want to point out there's several fur brushes, but it's the last fur brush before this granite brush. Okay? That's the one I'm going to use. If you want to use a different one, you can do that. And I'm just looking at my settings here on this. I got stroke path, dynamics, Apple Pencil, properties. So we got maximum size and minimum size. So, and you can see how they kind of work here, okay? Stroke path, under shape, rotation, we want touch properties, we want to go follow stroke. I think this is set up okay? I've just wanted to play around with that, because you may need to go in here and adjust this a little bit, especially within your properties. Because one of the things I did was, and I don't know if this brush was set up like this, because we can go and check another one of these brushes here, like this one. Yeah, this was the problem I had, and this is what I changed, was the minimal opacity I made the same, okay? So now it's going to look the same there. I'm going to use this brush that I have there. And we're just going to pick a little darker color. And let's see here. I have this color that I was going to use. What I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to make a new layer. And instead of doing it, because we could paint within him, but I want to be able to edit the color. So I'm going to do this on a different layer. And I'm going to do a clipping mask. And with the clipping mask, let me just make sure my opacity is always set up here. Because usually, if I'm painting, if I'm painting in some different colors, like with the ears or whatever, I have it set so it's a little bit different. Anyway, let me see here. Is this a clipping mask? Nope, it's not set for clipping mask. Set for clipping mask. There we go. So what clipping mask does is it will actually clip that out there. And I'm just going to shade him quickly here. And I'm kind of going a little bit over. I kind of did this in Photoshop too, because I want to erase out. Sometimes I get some better edges there if I erase out, and I usually like to erase out with the same brush. Okay, and so let's go to our eraser tool and then go down to find the concept art brushes and use the same brush and make sure the opacity is set the same way. But see, we can erase out with that same brush there. I'm going to turn my drawing off for the moment, just so we can see that a little bit better, see what I'm doing. Because I find when doing texture, it's important to kind of go back and forth, and you lay down your texture and then you erase it away. And see, that looks really kind of nice like that. Okay, I'm gonna make a new layer here. Do clipping mask, and then we'll pick a lighter color, maybe that color there. And if it's too light, we can always change it. But I'm going to just put in some lighter colors, trying to show anatomy there. Try to give him some form, since just to make it look like he has knees. But anyway, this is how I ended up doing this piece. If I'm painting on the inside of something, I set my opacity and flow down lower. Like, let's go down to the shoe layer here. I've got the pixels locked. I'm going to pick a darker color. This time I'm going to go to basic and go back to that little raven brush and paint in some darker areas on these shoes. And if that is not dark enough, we can go to this color here. There we go. This little raven brush is pretty large. Now here's the deal. And we can sample off here too. Is when you're doing line art, and I don't think I said this clear enough in the Photoshop tutorial, is the color that we use has to be lighter than the line art. Because if your colors get too dark, you can't see the outline anymore. Okay. So anyway, this should give you a pretty good idea of how to finish this, and this is what it looks like in the end. Okay. Anyway, what you want to do is you should have all your layers named. I didn't name them because this was my first version of coloring this. Okay. But let's say I wanted to upload this one, and I actually have a name for it, or if you don't have a name for it, you can name them. And the way you name them is, this is untitled. You just click and you can make a title for it. Because I have a lot of people submit Procreate files, and they have no name. And they tell me, I've exported it from Procreate. It's like, you can still name them, So what we're going to do is we're going to go to select. I'm going to pick this one. We're going to go share. We're going to save it as a PSD. Okay, that's a Photoshop file. That means that you could actually export that out to Photoshop. And you're going to save to your files or wherever you're going to do this to, because you're going to upload it to D2L, okay? And mind you, I don't use this. I could probably try to get into D2L this way, but I usually just save this in my Creative Cloud or on my desktop, and we can name this thing with your last name. Exercise 3, okay? And we'll save that, and then that's what you submit to the D2L once you finish this all. I hope this helps you out. Hope you have fun doing this. And if you have any questions, just send me an email.